Hey everybody, this is Andre here with the Kevin Breeze channel, and in this video, we're going to be doing a comparison between the OnePlus Nord N100 and the Motorola Moto G Play. To get more information about the pricing and availability of these phones, definitely check the link in the description because pricing and availability is always changing. That being said, let's get started. So the OnePlus Nord N100 has a 6.52-inch IPS LCD display in 90 Hz with a resolution of 720p, a PPI of 269, an aspect ratio of 20:9, and a screen-to-body ratio of 82.9%. The Motorola Moto G Play has a 6.5-inch IPS LCD display with a resolution of 720p, a PPI of 270, a resolution of 20:9, and a screen-to-body ratio of 80.6%. So these are really similar displays. The OnePlus Nord N100 does have slightly thinner bezels and a hole-punch front-facing camera. As you can see here, the design is a lot more modern looking. In addition to that, the OnePlus Nord N100 actually has a 90 Hz display, which is a little more on the uncommon side for an entry-level phone, whereas the Motorola Moto G Play does not have a 90 Hz display. So overall, the display of the OnePlus Nord N100 is going to be a little bit smoother and look a little bit nicer. So again, the OnePlus Nord N100 does have a hole punch for the front-facing camera. As you can see here, it does look really nice, and it goes with the sleek look given by the thinner bezels. This camera is 8 megapixels. Now the Motorola Moto G Play has a water drop for the front-facing camera, which I'm really not a big fan of. I think the water drop is a little outdated. Manufacturers are rightly so moving more and more away from the water drop for the front-facing camera design. Having just an extension from the bezel definitely does give it a more old look, and it doesn't look very clean either. This little drop here just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me as far as the design goes, and it really kind of gets in the way. That being said, this camera is 5 megapixels, so we do have a bit of a difference here as far as the power of the camera goes. Now the OnePlus Nord N100 has 64 gigabytes of internal storage with microSD card expansion, and the Motorola Moto G Play has 32 gigabytes of internal storage, also with microSD card expansion. So there's a huge difference here. Clearly the OnePlus Nord N100 is going to have a much larger storage space than the Moto G Play. With double the amount of storage, you're definitely going to have a lot more space. If you have a lot of photos and videos that you take, or if you have larger apps like games and that sort of thing, you're definitely going to benefit. Even if you don't do a whole lot, it is better to have more storage than you need. And while 32 is acceptable in some cases, with apps getting larger and larger these days, the system alone taking up a ton of space, and everything in between, it's definitely better to have more storage. I would say in this day and age, 64 gigabytes is honestly more of a minimum for internal storage, as opposed to 32, which I think is definitely not enough. Even if you do use a microSD card to expand the storage, it's not going to help you out that much with apps because apps can't really run from a microSD card. If you are taking up most of your space with photos and videos, then I guess it's okay, but I personally still prefer to have more space on the internal storage of the phone itself. To give you an idea of what this difference actually looks like, the Nord N100 has 20.12 gigabytes being used on it, only taking up 31% of the internal storage. As you can see here, the system is a huge part of that, which means you really can't get around having that space taken up. With the Moto G Play, 19.04 gigabytes of space is being used on the phone, and this is taking up 59% of the storage. So the Moto G Play is actually using a little bit less space than the Nord N100, but at the same time, there is much less space available. Now this is pretty obvious, but it does emphasize the point that having more storage is always going to be better. And in this case, the OnePlus Nord N100 has a very clear advantage over the Moto G Play in that regard. Now, neither of these phones have wireless charging, unfortunately. That is a feature more reserved for higher end and flagship phones, but I do hope that in the future, it does get implemented on more entry-level and mid-range phones because I think it's a really useful thing to have. That being said, both of the phones do have fingerprint scanners and face unlock, which is really good to have both of the options because in some situations, a fingerprint scanner might be more convenient and in others, face unlock might be better. So it's nice to have both. The fingerprint scanners on these phones are in the same spot, right on the back, right here. Very simple and comfortable to reach. Starting with the Nord N100, we're going to test these fingerprint scanners out and see how well they perform. There we go. That was really good. One more time. No complaints there. Really fast and responsive. Easy to use. Again, I had no trouble reaching it, so that's good. Testing out the fingerprint scanner for the Moto G Play. There we go, one more time. And that was also very fast and responsive as well. Now, during the second try testing both of these fingerprint scanners, I did intentionally place my finger at a really weird angle to see if the fingerprint scanner would still read it, and it did. So both of them are really great. No complaints there. They're basically the same performance-wise as pretty much any fingerprint scanner is. No problems and real convenient to use. Now taking a look at the camera setup of these two phones, the Nord N100 has a 13 megapixel rear camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. The Moto G Play has a 13 megapixel rear camera and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So the cameras that these phones both do have are on paper the same. Both have 13 megapixels for their rear camera and their depth sensing camera. And unfortunately, neither of them have an ultra wide camera. Now the Nord N100 does have a macro camera, so that is good at least, but the Moto G Play doesn't have that either. So these are two pictures taken by each phone respectively. The one on the left, of course, is the Nord N100, and the one on the right is the Moto G Play. Both of the pictures do look pretty good. I think the photo taken by the Nord N100 is a little bit brighter, showing that it handles exposure arguably a little better. Both of the images are decently crisp, and the colors are balanced in pretty much the same way. The only real difference between the two is how the lighting is handled, and that really does affect the overall image in general. So I do think in this situation, I really wouldn't say one has a clear advantage over the other. Both of the cameras are really good, and I don't think there's anything wrong with either picture. Now these are two pictures taken with the front-facing camera of these two phones. Again, the picture taken with the OnePlus Nord N100 is a little bit brighter, whereas the shadows are a little bit stronger in the picture taken by the Moto G Play. I think in the image taken by the Nord N100, the image is a little bit more crisp, whereas in the picture taken with the Moto G Play, the details aren't as strong. Now, I'm not going to be testing the macro camera of the Nord N100. Since the Moto G Play doesn't have one, there's really nothing to compare it to, but if you are interested in seeing how that one works, you can definitely check out the full review of the phone on the channel. Now video-wise, both of these phones shoot 1080p videos in both the front and rear cameras, so they're pretty much the same in that regard. Now in terms of overall camera quality, I don't think the quality is really that different, but I would give the edge to the OnePlus Nord N100 because not only are the pictures just a tiny bit better quality in the rear camera, but they're noticeably better in the front-facing camera, and in addition to that, the Nord N100 has a macro camera, whereas the Moto G Play doesn't. Now, are either of these phones really fit for professional use? I wouldn't say so. I don't think that you would want to use these phones primarily for any serious photography. Now, there are phones out there these days that have cameras so good they rival some DSLRs. In fact, the top of the line flagship phones like some of the iPhones and the Samsung Galaxy Note 20 Ultra and that sort of device are maybe even better than DSLRs in similar price ranges to the phones themselves. But these phones are really not professional devices as far as the camera goes, and I would definitely not expect to get that sort of quality out of the images. These phones don't have anything fancy like a telephoto lens or an ultra-wide camera, but really for what they're intended for, which is really using apps like Snapchat, Instagram, sending pictures to friends, that sort of thing, they really are useful for that. And I would definitely say that neither of these phones has a bad camera. Now internally, the OnePlus Nord N100 is getting 4GB of RAM with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 460 processor. The Moto G Play is getting 3GB of RAM, also with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 460 processor. So these phones do have the same processor, the only difference is the RAM. We ran Geekbench 5 benchmark tests on each of these phones, and the Nord N100 came back with a single core score of 251 and a multi-core score of 1172, and the Moto G Play came back with a single core score of 219 and a multi-core score of 1058. Now, this is actually not surprising at all because they do both have the Qualcomm Snapdragon 460 processor, which is a really good processor. The main difference is the RAM, and since the Nord N100 does have a little bit more RAM, and since the Nord N100 does have more RAM, it also makes sense that it is a little bit faster as well. But keep in mind that this difference is very small, and in terms of overall performance, you're really not going to see that much of a difference, so I wouldn't use this as a deciding factor to determine which of these phones you want to get, just because the difference is so small that it's not going to really affect your overall experience that much. Both of these phones are going to be great for not only your basic activities, but also some things like photo editing, maybe a little bit of gaming. And then consuming content is going to be great on these phones too, because with this type of processing power, they are going to load pretty fast. That being said, I wouldn't say that doing a lot of video editing or heavy gaming, more complex things with complicated graphics, would be a good idea on either of these phones, because those features are more meant for flagship phones and higher end devices, whereas these phones still, even though they do have pretty impressive numbers as far as processing power goes, are not quite at that level. Both of these phones have 5,000 milliamp hour batteries, so for all intents and purposes, the battery is basically the same. The one difference is if you have a fast charger, really more specifically, if you have a large fast charger, then there might be a little bit of a difference because the Nord N100 supports 18 watt fast charging, whereas the Moto G Play only supports 10 watt fast charging. But you're not going to see this difference unless you have an 18 watt fast charger or higher, in which case the Nord N100 will charge a little bit faster. But again, I really don't think that in practical application, this is going to make that much of a difference, because how often are you actually going to be using an 18 watt fast charger to charge your phone? You're not going to have it plugged in 24/7. It's really not going to be quite about that when it comes to which phone is better than the other. So I really don't think the difference matters that much. Now, in conclusion, which of these devices is better? These are definitely close, and in many different areas, I would say they're practically the same as far as specs and features go, but I would give the edge to the OnePlus Nord N100. This phone does have a slightly better display, a nice, more modern, sleek look about it, and it also has a 90Hz display, which means it's going to be a lot smoother. So if you're doing something like content consumption, this is really going to come into play. Not only that, but I do think the camera is not a whole lot better, but still noticeably better than that of the Moto G Play. So that is also a factor. And then if we're getting really specific here, it does have not only a little bit more processing power, but it also supports a higher level fast charging than the Moto G Play. So that's going to make a little bit of a difference too. That being said, if we're just looking at this from a holistic overall perspective, I wouldn't really say these phones are that different from each other. In real life, if you're trying to decide between each phone, I think that whatever you can get the best deal on is going to be the best choice for you. That being said, if you want to get some more information about the pricing and availability of the phones that might help you make your decision better, be sure to check the link in the description, because that's going to give you all that information, and pricing and availability is always changing. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to leave a thumbs up and subscribe. And as always, I'll see you guys in the next video.